Are you sure you know what your grandfathers actually fought with? Official history is a polished fairy tale about flawless PPShs and invincible MP40s. But behind the glossy posters lies true chaos. Archives packed with reports of corruption, engineering madness, and soldiers turned into cannon fodder, handed malfunctioning surrogates instead of real weapons. Victory in the greatest meat grinder of the 20th century was forged not only by flashes of genius, but on the bones of those held hostage by the ambitions of office-bound leaders. While headquarters drew arrows on maps, factories, for the sake of penny pinching, created steel monsters that refused to fire at the most critical moments. We will tear away this fake luster and peer into the dark corners of weapon arsenals, where prototypes capable of horrifying any professional gather dust. This is a chronicle of fatal mistakes and cynical calculation, where a human life was always worth less than a pound of milled metal. Let's start with the aristocrat among submachine guns, a weapon that American generals cold-bloodedly tossed into the dustbin of history for the sake of dubious savings, but which became the ultimate dream for those accustomed to killing without witnesses. American generals committed a true crime against logic, cold-bloodedly striking this high-precision beast from the supply lists. In 1942, the price of a private soldier's life was officially deemed lower than the cost of high-quality milling for a steel bolt. The United Defense M42 submachine gun was a true Rolls-Royce in a world where everyone was used to driving tin cans. While the US Army was frantically searching for a replacement for the prohibitively expensive Thompson, the UD designers delivered a masterpiece, a reliable, ergonomic, and devilishly accurate weapon. But the military bureaucracy issued its verdict. Too good. Why pay for reliability and shooter comfort when you could churn out millions of cheap, crooked M3 grease guns made of stamped sheet metal? The M42 project was officially declared expediently unfeasible, simply because it didn't look like cheap trash. Its fate was supposed to end in a smelting furnace without ever firing a single shot in combat. But at the very moment the Pentagon put a heavy cross through the project, men in civilian clothes appeared on the factory doorstep. Operatives of an agency whose name in those years made enemies stutter with fear. While the regular infantry bogged down in the mud with cheap scraps of iron, the elite of the OSS, precursors to the modern CIA, claimed everything that had been deemed too expensive for the ordinary cannon fodder. They didn't count money, they counted enemy corpses. The M42 became that very secret favorite that never made the newspapers. The operatives of the Office of Strategic Services didn't give a damn about Pentagon estimates or accounting reports. They needed the perfect tool for delicate and dirty work where there was no front line, only you and the enemy in a dark alley. The UD M42 fit perfectly into the hands of those accustomed to working in the shadows. It didn't misfire, it didn't jam at the critical moment, and it allowed for aimed fire when the fate of an entire operation depended on a single shot. While the army saved cents, the spies invested in steel that guaranteed results. However, the true secret behind this submachine gun's wild popularity among saboteurs deep behind enemy lines was hidden in one cynical engineering detail that turned it into the perfect parasite on the body of the Nazi machine. This weapon was conceived as the ultimate parasite, capable of devouring Wehrmacht resources from within. A brilliant and utterly cynical calculation by American engineers for scenarios where a saboteur had to fight in total isolation. The UD M42's main trump card lay in its foreign caliber. While all of America worshipped the heavy .45 ACP rounds, this submachine gun was chambered for the classic European 9 by 19mm parabellum cartridge. This wasn't a mistake, it was a death sentence for the enemy's supply chain. Every captured German barracks, every killed SS officer or ordinary patrolman turned into a free refueling station for this weapon. Resistance partisans didn't have to wait for risky airdrops. They simply undressed the enemy and immediately returned their own lead, only this time fired from a precision American barrel. But if the M42 was a story of triumph against the will of the generals, the next entry on our list turned into a living nightmare that American soldiers hated even more than Japanese snipers. How do you turn the elite Marine Corps into easy targets for a Japanese shooting range? Simply issue them a weapon designed for subduing unarmed demonstrators and dispersing street gangs, rather than for a major war. The Reising submachine gun is a classic example of how cheap almost always means deadly for the owner. While the front lines suffered from a catastrophic shortage of Thompsons, an enterprising designer promised the Marines a miracle: a light, accurate and, most importantly, dirt-cheap automatic weapon. But reality proved far harsher than the advertising brochures. What worked perfectly in the hands of a policeman on clean asphalt began to crumble into dust the moment it fell into the claws of a real war. US Marines effectively became guinea pigs in a cynical experiment to replace combat weapons with a budget surrogate that refused to function at the most critical moments. Yet even the general flimsiness of the design paled in comparison to the wildest failure visible to the naked eye. Engineers decided that a soldier in the heat of battle vitally needed to poke his finger into an extra hole. A design innovation on paper turned shooting into a game of Russian roulette with death in reality. One wrong move, and your vaunted submachine gun becomes a useless piece of wood and steel in your hands. The Reising engineers chose the path of minimalism and committed an act of design sabotage. They completely removed the external charging handle. To cock the weapon or chamber a round, a soldier had to stick his finger through a special slot in the bottom of the forend and push a hidden slide. In a sterile shooting range, this seemed like a clever quirk. But imagine a battle. Your hands are covered in blood, sweat, or mud, and you have to grope for a narrow slit in the belly of the gun just to get it to fire. This wasn't ergonomics, it was a mocking torture for which the designers should have been sent to the front lines with their own creation. When the Reising finally faced the literal hell of the Pacific jungles, the wild environment quickly delivered its final and bloodiest verdict on this holy design. Tropical humidity and the sticky sand of the Solomon Islands did to the Reising what Japanese divisions could not. They completely paralyzed American units, turning them into an unarmed crowd. The M50 submachine gun required conditions comparable to the sterility of an operating room. Its parts were fitted so tightly that any microscopic speck of grit or drop of condensation locked the bolt dead. In the conditions of Guadalcanal, where mud was everywhere, in boots, in food, and in lungs, this weapon became a liability. Soldiers discovered that stripping this technological marvel in field conditions turned into hours of torture, with the constant risk of losing tiny springs in the thick grass. The men quickly realized a terrifying truth. This barrel was killing its owners far more effectively than enemy bullets, simply by failing in the heat of a banzai charge. The Marines' rage eventually boiled over. Driven to madness, officers took an unprecedented step that went down in history as the most massive act of collective contempt for government property. A scene that would give any rear echelon quartermaster a heart attack. Hundreds of brand new shiny submachine guns being tossed overboard into the saltwater by direct order of the command. This wasn't a loss during transport, it was an execution of metal. On Guadalcanal, the officer's patience finally snapped. The commander of the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, seeing his men die because of jammed Reisings, gave an order that today would be called state sabotage. The soldiers simply gathered this trash and drowned it in the nearest river to clear the ledgers and gain the legal right to demand proper rifles or the good old Thompsons. The shameful path of this police miscarriage in a major war ended with the remains of the batches being exiled to the Coast Guard, far from the front lines, so they could at least pretend to be weapons for patrolmen. But while the Americans were drowning their defective submachine guns in the jungle, in the very heart of Europe, Czech gunsmiths were creating a heavy monster that combined the uncombinable and spat in the face of logic. Why choose between a compact submachine gun and a heavy machine gun when you can create a mad steel beast with bipods, capable of spitting lead for hours without turning into a lump of molten metal? The ZK-383 is a true monument to Czech stubbornness and engineering maximalism. In an era when the whole world was striving for maximum simplicity and lightness, the designers from Brno took the path of creating a universal soldier. They equipped what appeared to be an ordinary submachine gun with massive bipods and a quick-change barrel, turning it into a heavy, clunky, but devilishly effective tool for total fire suppression. It was a true weaponized hermaphrodite that fit into no tactical scheme, yet possessed a power that forced enemy infantry to hug the ground at the very first sound of its burst. However, the main secret of this mechanical monster was hidden neither in the bipods nor the thickness of the barrel, but in a small steel pill that allowed the shooter to change the rules of the game right in the heat of a bloody slaughter. The designers of the ZK-383 gave the soldier almost divine power over the speed of death. Want to economically pick off individuals? Keep the weight in. Want to turn the battlefield into a bloody meat grinder? Take it out and pray. The wildest innovation of this Czech monster was hidden inside the bolt. It was a simple steel slug that acted as a mechanical regulator of rage. With the weight installed, the weapon turned into a calculating killer with a rate of 500 rounds per minute, perfect for control and saving scarce ammunition. But the moment the shooter removed this part, the ZK-383 slipped its leash, unleashing an insane 700 rounds per minute. This turned the firing position into an erupting volcano of lead. No other submachine gun of that time allowed one to so brazenly and quickly change its combat character, depending on how deep they were mired in hell. But the bitterest irony of this technical genius lay in the fact that all these innovations ultimately went, not to the defenders of freedom, but to the darkest and most ruthless force in human history. While the regular Wehrmacht made do with mass-produced consumer goods, the SS death squads and the Third Reich's police pounced greedily on these Czech toys. For Himmler's executioners and elite guards, this weapon became a true status symbol. The moment the German soldier's boot crossed the threshold of the Brno factory, the assembly lines didn't stop. They simply changed masters. The Nazis instantly recognized the precision assembly and firepower of the ZK-383. While regular units flooded the front with cheap MP40s, Waffen-SS units were receiving the Czech superweapon. This submachine gun became the perfect instrument for occupational terror, heavy, reliable, and capable of crushing any resistance with long, dense bursts. A weapon created by the Czechs to defend their sovereignty was transformed into a symbol of the darkest oppression in European history. Thus, engineering genius was enslaved by pure evil, leaving behind nothing but a bloody trail and questions about the price we pay for technical perfection. We are used to viewing World War II through the rose-colored lenses of heroic action movies, where every shot hits its mark and weapons never fail. But off-camera, there remain mountains of rusted, defective metal and thousands of lives cut short, simply because someone in a cozy office decided to save money on a spring. The fates of the UD M42, the Reising, and the Czech ZK-383 are not just paragraphs in manuals for steel enthusiasts. They are a harsh reminder that in a major war, it is not the smartest, the most talented, or even the most accurate who wins. Most often, it is the cheapest, the most mass-produced, or the most arrogant who prevails. We have seen masterpieces tossed onto the scrap heap, police junk drowned in the ocean out of desperation, and engineering genius become the loyal hound of bloody dictatorships. The history of weaponry is a graveyard of ambitions, where true scars that never healed on the body of history hide beneath a layer of dust. Do you think these are all the skeletons in the closets of the world's arsenals? We have only just begun to crack open these Pandora's boxes. What other secret or forgotten caliber will force you to reconsider everything you knew about war? Subscribe if you're ready to hear the truth that the textbooks keep quiet about. Chas.